Hi, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and our topic for tonight is 5 crises or 7. Hope you're well this evening. And hello, Kay. I noticed that you've arrived. Thank you for coming. I hope you're doing well. And I was interested, actually, yesterday to watch an episode of Duran. It was Alex Mercouris, actually. Alexander Mercouris, I should say. One of his streams. He talked about the American foreign policy decision makers, President Biden, Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken, and the 7 others who seem to be the decision-making group in the foreign policy areas. About all of them are extremely anxious about simultaneous crises that are emerging at the same time. And based on an article in Axios, Alexander was talking about 5 simultaneous crises. First crisis was the Israeli response, to Hamas's attack. Second crisis that they're currently very concerned about is the meeting of Xi and Putin to forge still closer ties in order to resist the collective West. Third crisis, is the malicious activities, as they characterize it, of Iran towards the U.S. And this decision-making group, according to the article in Axios and according to Alexander, is seen as having very malicious attitudes and carrying on very malicious activities against the United States. And they view Iran as almost certainly involved in the Hamas terrorist attack. I personally think this is a little far-fetched. I don't know what involved means here, but I'm sure we will learn more about that in the future. But the fourth crisis they were very concerned about was North Korea and the activities of North Korea and getting closer to Russia once again. And of course, they are very concerned about the nuclear capability of North Korea, and they view Kim Jong-un, the current ruler of North Korea, as insane. A verdict which is, I believe, and highly debatable. Anyway, the fifth so-called crisis is what they view as the disinformation crisis. Uh, so, uh, I'm not so sure about what disinformation actually means. From their point of view, I have a feeling that what they think is disinformation, I might not think of, okay, as but disinformation. But okay, let me give attention to each of these five crises. Uh, Comment a little bit, okay, on each of them. First, the Israeli response to Hamas attacks, okay, is concerning because it is so excessive and so disproportionate and so much involved in the commission of war crimes, okay, and of human rights crimes ongoing. And that is why, okay, it is disturbing from my point of view, but of course, it's right to consider it as very disturbing as well because the disproportionality of it brings other forces into play. Specifically, Iran is quite concerned about that. Of course, the Egyptians are worried about it. Various reasons. The Jordanians are worried about it as well. Saudi, okay, is worried about it. But also Hezbollah in Lebanon is terribly worried about it. And why should we be concerned about what Hezbollah thinks? Well, let's take a look. Let's take a look at a piece which appeared in Haaretz. Uh, okay. Okay, I guess I need to share that. Hey, Stephen Wolfbrand, how are you? So let me present that. Why should we be concerned about what Hezbollah thinks? Well, this article from Haaretz, which I don't think is exaggerated, 150,000 missiles aimed at Israel. How far does Hezbollah's deadly arsenal reach? We're now at the point where Hezbollah has far more rockets and missiles than most governments in the world. This article, by the way, was written by Oded Yaron. But what I just read was a quote from the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin from a joint press conference with his Israeli counterpart that just occurred. Oh, I'm sorry. This is a quote by Robert Gates in 2010. That was when he gave his grave assessment alongside of Ehud Barak, who I guess was at that point the prime minister of Israel. But since then, Hezbollah has only grown stronger, says the author. The Lebanese terrorist organization, and I would put terrorist there in quotes, has immensely expanded and upgraded its stockpile of rockets and various weapon systems with the help of an enthusiastic Iran and the experience the group gained when hoping to rescue Bashar al-Assad's rule in the Syrian civil war. That was, of course, on their part, a successful effort. According to the latest public estimates, Hezbollah has around 150,000 rockets and missiles, most with a range of a few dozen kilometers. Various reports, however, say a substantial number can reach targets located hundreds of kilometers from Lebanon. Hezbollah is the most heavily armed non-state actor in the world, concluded researchers from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington in an extensive 2018 report on the lethal arsenal stationed just north of Israel. The group holds a large and diverse reserve of dumb rocket artillery alongside ballistic, anti-air, anti-tank, and anti-ship missiles, the report found. In a conversation with Haaretz this week, Sean Sheikh, one of the study's authors, warned that Hezbollah's intervention in Syria, quote, raises its concerns about its acquisition of more sophisticated standoff and precision-guided missiles, whether from Syria, from Iran, or Russia, unquote. Standoff missiles are long-range missiles that can be fired from far away, that the launchers remain protected. And here's an estimate of Hezbollah's arsenal. Katyusha, or Grad rockets, which have a range of 40 miles, they have tens of thousands of those. They have some 10-kilometer missiles as well, some 15-kilometer missiles, and numbers of those are unknown. But the Fajar 3 missiles that have a 40-kilometer range and a warhead up to 45 kilograms, they have tens of thousands of those. The number of unknown Shaheen 1, those are 15-kilometer missiles, but carry warheads of 190 kilograms. That's pretty big. How many of those they have are unknown, but they might have quite a few. Fajr 5, a range of 75 kilometers, a warhead of 90 kilograms. Okay, Ra'ad 3, 70 kilometers and 50 kilograms. The number of that is unknown. But they also have Khyber 1 M302 missiles. That range is 100 kilometers and it carries warheads of 150 kilograms. And the number it's estimated there is thousands, not tens of thousands, but also thousands. Those are all rockets. Then there are missiles. They have Zalzal 1, a range of 160 kilometers, a warhead of 600 kilograms. They have tens of thousands of those. I'm not going to go through all of these, but this map, which you can see here, Kiryat Shmona, which you see, identified here, is in the northernmost part, of Israel. Some of the Hezbollah missiles could be fired from a distance very, very close to Kiryat Shmona. I don't know, that looks like it's, maybe 5 kilometers or something like that, or maybe 10 kilometers. They can certainly reach that major Israeli settlement. But Haifa is within 50 kilometers of them. And they have lots of missiles that go lots of rockets that go 75 kilometers, 70 kilometers, 100 kilometers, and missiles, of course, that go far beyond Haifa. 100 kilometers gets to many sizable settlements in the area uh, between Haifa, okay, and Tel Aviv. I'm not sure whether that gets to Netanya or not. The reason why I mention that, that's a very sizable city, something like 75 to 100,000. Okay, I believe. The reason why I have a special concern for that city is I have some relatives who had settled there in a kibbutz somewhere, okay, in that area, and they can be reached by those missiles and even perhaps by some of the rockets. Okay, now Netanya might be just south of the 100-kilometer range. Uh, and you see some of those some of those missiles can easily get to Tel Aviv, the Jaffa area, which is a very large center, okay, of Israeli population, and that's within range of missiles, tens of thousands of missiles, tens of thousands, okay, of missiles. So you see the threat that actually represents to major population centers inside, okay, of Israel. And you see the numbers of missiles and rockets juxtaposed against the Rangers. You can see what Hezbollah can do to Israel. So, according to an article going further recently published by the Institute for National Security Studies, Hezbollah has about 40,000 short-range Grad-type rockets, 80,000 Fajr-3 and Fajr-5 Kaibar and Rad, which are the medium long-range rockets, 30,000 long-range Zelzal rockets, and the Fatah 110 M600 types of missiles. Hezbollah also has a limited number of Scud-type missiles from Syria, several Fatah 110 missiles, which carry around 500 kilograms, 1,100 pounds, and are equipped with precise GPS navigation mechanisms and have considerable accuracy and destructive potential. So, in recent years, Hezbollah has devoted most of its efforts to its precision project, a concentrated attempt. Oh, I got to let in D. I'm sorry. I've been letting her sit there, I think. She's still there. Here she goes.
Hello.
Sorry. Hi, I was in the middle of that article, and
That's fine.
sorry I let you sit there for so long.
That wasn't too long by the time I got over here.
Okay, so I'm going to get back to that article then. So, let's go south there. So, the military and defense ministry estimate that Hezbollah may fire several thousand rockets on the first few days of war and continue with 1,500 a day for the rest of the war. During the second of the Lebanese wars in 2006, Hezbollah fired approximately 200 rockets per day, and that was very annoying to the Israelis. Imagine what 1,500 rockets per day will do. In recent years, the group, Hezbollah that is, has devoted most of its efforts to its, quote, precision project, unquote, a concentrated attempt to add guiding systems to its unguided rockets, The goal is to transform them from indiscriminate weapons to ones that are able not just to strike terror in the enemy population, but also directly hit strategic targets such as headquarters, military bases, power stations, and areas with troop concentrations. Now, I have to emphasize, the U.S. aircraft carriers, the one that's already there, the Gerald Ford, and the other, I believe it's called the Eisenhower, that is steaming there now. Both of those will be within range of Hezbollah rockets, and missiles. And again, if you look at this map, you're going to see that the range of those goes quite a ways out to sea. So if the carriers are anywhere near there, uh, they're going to be subject most probably to rocket attack. Well, they may be anyway. There's certainly a threat of that. And I think the United States has to contemplate what happens if one or more of those carriers are sunk. What happens in terms of the reaction at home? What happens and the potential for a widening war? Alongside Hezbollah's immense artillery arsenal, the organization has a large stock of anti-aircraft missiles, including shoulder-fired ones to down helicopters and low-altitude aircraft. Shoulder-fired missiles leave no signature revealing the location of those who launched them, who can disappear quickly. Hezbollah also has heavy anti-air systems, including surface-to-air missiles and launchers that can hit aerial targets at a range of up to 50 kilometers at a height of up to 24 kilometers. So you're talking a considerable threat to Israeli planes and to any U.S. planes that are coming off of the carriers, if the U.S. gets directly involved and if the carriers are not just a bluff. One of the most serious blows the IDF suffered during the second of the Lebanon wars was the damage wreaked by Hezbollah's extensive anti-tank units, particularly by the Russian-developed Kornet-guided missiles. Like the American Javelin, the Kornet can hit tanks from above, where the armor is relatively thin. So, I'm not going to go through the rest of this. The point is, you can see that Hezbollah represents a considerable threat, and that is why both the Israelis and the Americans have to be very concerned about them. But getting back to the crises here, the Xi-Putin meeting to forge still closer ties. Undoubtedly, at that meeting, Xi and Putin have been talking about uh, Hamas attacks and the proper response. And Putin and Xi have been sending some naval forces to the Middle East. It's not known whether they were all sent before the crisis or whether some were going to the Middle East anyway, just for solidarity purposes. But the Chinese have a number of destroyers that have gone to the area. I forget whether the total of those destroyers is 6 or 3, but it's multiple destroyers that the Chinese have sent. And the Russians have also sent some naval forces to the area, thus creating the potential for direct confrontations between the U.S. naval forces and the Russian and Chinese naval forces. Why should the Russians and Chinese get involved in this? Well, consider we've been trying to ring China with hostile forces now as part of our efforts inside of the Pacific to, quote, contain China, unquote. So if we get involved in China's business, we can hardly expect them not to get involved in our business in the Middle East. In any case, in not yet in very hostile moves, but in moves that might be perceived as somewhat threatening, there are Russian and Chinese naval forces that are going to the area. Now, what about the Iranian malicious attitudes towards the United States and involvement, in terrorist attacks? Well, I don't know what evidence there is for that. I suppose there's the usual undercover work by the CIA. Very often that is proven to be not so reliable. But what I see from the Iranians is a concern for their allies. Sorry, D.
No, I didn't say anything.
Hezbollah, and Syria. There's certainly a concern, for their allies, and a desire to see if they can back them up in case, of U.S. attacks on Hezbollah. I don't suppose that Iran is going to get involved if it's just a conflict between the Israelis and Hezbollah. But if the U.S. gets involved in actually attacking Hezbollah, it may be that Iran will give aid and that the war will widen. In that sense, that is certainly very dangerous. As far as North Korea and Kim Jong-un are concerned, I don't know the specifics of why the decision makers are so concerned about that. The Russians, of course, have made a deal, evidently with the Koreans, for 1 million artillery shells that they can use in efforts such as the war inside, of Ukraine. And the Russians, it's reported, are helping the North Koreans with hypersonic missile technology, which isn't even a technology that we have, in order to discourage the United States from attacking North Korea. I can see why, decision makers are concerned, over North Korea, but I really don't see them getting involved, in the Middle East crisis, or necessarily creating some intersectionality in this crisis that has started up there. We know they've already gotten involved, in the Ukrainian crisis, because they're selling armaments in a large-scale way to the Russians. We know that. Now, I have no idea exactly what the decision makers are thinking about when they mention disinformation, because the disinformation problem that I've been seeing has been coming from the propaganda of the United States continuously, and from the mass media in this country, which has prevented the population of the United States from getting anything like a realistic view of the military and economic power of the combination of Russia and China, and anything like, okay, a realistic view about what's going on, okay, in the war, okay, inside, okay, of Ukraine. So if there is a disinformation problem or a disinformation crisis, I would say it's coming from the collective West a lot more than it's coming from Russia and China, okay, and Iran. If by disinformation what we mean is information that is not true. Okay. Uh, so anyway, the disinformation crisis, in my view, is a crisis that is being created actually by ourselves. In large part, any crisis with North Korea is being largely created by ourselves as well, because we consistently make hostile public remarks against North Korea and the regime there, accusing its leader of being insane. And I don't know if there's any hard evidence of all that he's insane. He doesn't look too insane to me, but maybe I'm not as well educated as the CIA over these matters, over how insane he is. Anyway, when it comes to the malicious attitudes, okay, of Iran, it was we who decided to break the JCPOA agreement, which was the foundation for more friendly relations, okay, to Iran. We, of course, broke that during the Trump administration, and the Biden administration could not pull that agreement together again because it was laying down conditions that were totally unreasonable, considering that it was we who withdrew from the agreement. And even after we agreed, the Iranians continued to abide by the agreement for quite some time. Okay, the Iranians were saying, well, we have to come back to the agreement first, and when we do, they'd be ready to negotiate further with us. But we insisted that they meet certain conditions first, in spite of the fact that it was we who broke the original agreement and not they. I think if we're talking about who has the malicious attitudes, it seems to me we have the malicious attitudes towards them rather than them having the malicious attitudes towards us. As far as being involved in the Hamas attack, I'll believe that when the evidence presents itself. But I'd bet that they're not involved in that attack at all, that it was strictly coming from Hamas. Because what Hamas wanted to do was to bring the world's attention to the injustices that were being visited on Gaza and the West Bank every single day. So I'm sure Hamas pretty much acted on its own. They might not even have given a warning to Hezbollah, okay, much less to Iran. So I guess what I have to say, if these 5 crises are coming to a head simultaneously, it seems to me that it's the decision makers' fault. They've been doing it on their own as a result of U.S. foreign policy. The Israeli response to the Hamas attacks have occurred because Hamas wanted to resist the Israeli occupation. And in fact, it had long since become an illegal occupation because of the war crimes and the human rights crimes that were being committed by the Israelis constantly. If the foreign policy of the U.S. had not been to give the Israelis a blank check all this time with respect to how they treated the Palestinians in Gaza and how they treated the Palestinians, in the West Bank, then maybe we wouldn't be looking at the current Israeli response to Hamas. It might be entirely different. In fact, the Hamas attacks might never have taken place themselves. So we may have a crisis now, but I think a lot of the blame for the crisis has to be laid at the feet, of the U.S. for its basically giving Israel a blank check in terms of what it was allowing Israel to do to the Palestinians. And especially when Netanyahu took over. At that point, there should certainly have been a big change in U.S. policy to warn him off making things worse. And since he has taken over, his regime has just been impossible to the Palestinians. As far as Xi and Putin meeting to forge still closer ties, well, after all, it was the U.S. who provoked the war, in Ukraine. And it was the U.S. who's been propagandizing the collective West that have been propagandizing to put the blame Putin, to charge him with being, a war criminal, where most of the evidence that's available suggests that the war criminals are in Ukraine and not on the Russian side. So if we have these simultaneous crises, I wanted to emphasize that I think the simultaneous crises coming together at once, that a lot of the blame for these crises must be laid at the feet of U.S. foreign policy. But Alexander Mercouris, in his stream, was careful to note that it's awfully strange, that our decision makers don't consider that part of these simultaneous crises is what perhaps is a sixth crisis, specifically the way the war in Ukraine has been going, because it's apparent that a defeat of Ukraine in the collective West is impending, is closer and closer, and that the only thing slowing down the potential complete defeat of Ukraine is the fall weather beginning to turn a little rainy, which will make continuing to fight very difficult, in Ukraine due to the mud problem. Alexander raised the question of why didn't they consider that Ukraine was part of the six intersecting crises? What accounts for their thinking in this area when it's so obvious that Ukraine is? And he speculated that maybe that it wasn't that they didn't see Ukraine as a serious crisis, but perhaps they thought it was the most serious of all the crises, and that they were upset and feeling uncomfortable because, as well as having to deal with the Ukraine crisis as the most important crisis of all, they also had to deal with these other five intersecting crises, at the same time. And that really, from the standpoint of those decision makers, the Ukraine crisis was the most important of all the crises and might have priority, over all of them. Well, I guess I have to say, I think that uh, situation with Israel and Palestine, if it escalates more and more, as it has been, may have to take center stage, and the decision makers inside the U.S., as ignored as they are, may have to uh, give most of their decision making time uh, to the Israeli Palestinian crisis, as opposed to the Ukraine crisis. Certainly, if things keep up the way they're going, more and more military help may have to be given to the Israelis, at least from the point of view of this particular decision making group, which I sincerely hope would very quickly resign from power because their foreign policy has been so awful. But now we get to the seventh of all of the crises. It's the seventh crisis that I see here in the United States. That crisis is the crisis, of oligarchy, which to me is the highest priority of all these crises. Because we have the political oligarchies, the political and economic oligarchies here in the United States, rushing to an election in 2024 that is going to give us another choice of Trump versus Biden, with both campaigns promising to create an extreme crisis in the Pacific area with the Chinese, a crisis that could become more serious than any we are involved in now. This crisis of oligarchy here has to be ended. And I will repeat here a continuing message of mine and point out it's just as serious in the international relations foreign policy area as it is when it comes to domestic policy. We don't have any democracy in our foreign policy. This has for a long time been the case, even when we were much more of a democracy when it came to domestic policy back in the 1960s and 1970s. There was little democracy when it came to foreign policy. It was all being influenced and carried out by a small group of people, as it is today. And for me, this intersects with all the other crises because our decision makers currently and our likely decision makers under a new Trump administration would be decision makers that would continue to get us involved in risk, of nuclear war. We have that risk now because of the Ukrainian, adventure. It's being further exacerbated by the Middle Eastern crisis, which brings us closer and closer to nuclear war over that particular crisis. I don't think Trump can end that or would end that. I don't think that the Biden foreign policy people would act in a different way if they were returned to office. So the oligarchy crisis intersects with all of these others. And it may be the most serious of all the crises because it's bringing us closer to a Biden-Trump choice in 2024. And we can't have a choice like this because both of those potential administrations would bring increased risk of nuclear war for all of us, which would exacerbate the possibility of the climate catastrophe as well in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. We have to end the oligarchy crisis by bringing to power in the 2024 elections candidates who would immediately change the destructive foreign policies that have been followed um, by the Biden administration, and that uh, seem to be likely crises that would occur within a new Trump administration. So, as I've said, okay, in other live streams, that choice must be avoided. We must find and support the candidates. We must dump the corruption with respect to all of our candidates in order to remove the influence, okay, of the donors who pursue unlimited support by the U.S. government for Israel and also unlimited support for the military industrial complex and what they wish to do, and also unlimited support for U.S. companies abroad as they continue to exploit developing countries all over the world. The kind of foreign policy that supports that also has to stop. So, the oligarchy crisis, which can be treated by the dump the corruption movement, has to be ended. It is enormously important and maybe the most important of the intersecting crises, okay, of all. So that's my 7 crises. So I'm supplementing what Alexander Mercouris had to say in his particular stream, which I've linked to, okay, in the description here tonight. So uh, I'm looking for comments now. Dee, have you any comments?
Um, uh, I'm just overwhelmed by all of this, I have to say. And we've discussed it on my show too, is it's just such a mess. And the USA and we have Biden and all his neocons and Netanyahu and his right wing. You know, we want peace. We want a Palestinian state. And now you've got a whole issue going on. You have, Hezbollah is getting involved. I mean, they've had the small issues, skirmishes back and forth with Israel. But for them to have to see what's going on in Israel, Palestine, just to sit back and not do anything. But it's also the worry of having, you don't want a big issue in Lebanon either. A lot of damage coming from Israel, but you don't want to. That Israel, the Greater Israel Plan too, is how they want to expand. I mean, Hezbollah is trying to trying to. I think it's making it. They're making it difficult for Israel, because Israel has the Hezbollah in the one area and you have Hamas in the other area, and it makes it difficult on Israel. But they've all been victims of Israel, and the world. And when we look at the situation with with Ukraine, and the U.S. government's just caused so much havoc in the world. And then we have the mess too. Like you said, we don't want Trump in office, but we don't want Biden either. There's
Yes,
just a mess everywhere.
we can't have that choice. We have to
No,
have, a wider choice. And once again, whether we have a wider choice or not really depends on us.
it does.
All the voters who can get there have to go to the polls, and they have to vote against the candidates who are taking big money. And right now, those candidates look like they're going to be Biden, and Trump. Now, there might be much less big money behind Cornel West, and Bobby Kennedy, but Cornel West has begun to take some money from a wealthy billionaire, specifically Harlan Crow. Bobby Kennedy has been taking money from billionaires as well. They're not taking as much as Biden and Trump, but in Bobby Kennedy's case, his statements have been so pro Israel as to suggest that in foreign policy he would continue to give the Israelis the blank check that is one of the primary causes of the crisis, in Israel today, and the continuing crisis, in Israel. The blank check for Israel has to end, and a president and a presidential candidate who is taking big money from very strong supporters of Israel is very unlikely to end that kind of foreign policy.
Right, it's going to continue on.
It looks like it would be highly likely to continue on. So unless we see a change from Bobby Kennedy with respect to his positioning, on Israel, and we see a change in his donors, uh, we would have to conclude that he would be a very bad choice, to elect. And so by elimination, right now we come to Cornel West. I have a lot of misgivings about Cornel West's ability to manage the presidency and to be, a good president. But I have no doubt that he would change, our foreign policy, and that he could change, our foreign policy, so we no longer would present a hostile face to China and no longer present a hostile face, to Russia. I'm sure he would do both of those things.
Right. He would be really
And
good for foreign policy.
yes, however big his failures might be in the area of domestic policy, uh, still, the most essential things to do is to stop this foreign policy crisis that we have continuing for decades, that's just something we have to change.
Just did you
Or,
read about with the European Union that they've asked Ursula to step down? They've had enough, especially with the positioning, what's going on with Palestine, and her just acting as Biden and the rest of the West do. So the European Union is just fed up with her.
well, when you say that they've asked her to step down, I've read a lot of things about her losing support, but who has actually asked her to step down?
I'd have to go look it up, but I just saw that her being asked to step down.
Well, there are lots of people asking her to step down, but has the European Parliament actually voted to ask her to step down?
Let me see.
Okay, I think that's the key thing. I didn't see any announcement, okay, to that effect.
Okay, but at least it's right. Maybe it will build up the energy for them to get to that point.
Yeah, I think there are now a number of members of parliament who are asking her to resign because her bias towards Israel is far too strong.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're using that as grounds to ask her to step down. And I certainly agree with them. But she might step down if the European Parliament were to vote her out. But I don't see that happening quite yet.
I know she's there's something seeing the first thing I see here is she's mute on a second term, but
Good, because she's awful. So Steve Wolfbrand had some comments. Okay, after he said that that's a lot of missiles. And he said not all missiles would get through, but many would. Yeah, I think so too. I think the Iron Dome is reasonably capable, but there are many rockets and missiles, I think, that are going to get through. And some of them carry a pretty heavy payload, as you saw from that article that I went through. Uh, Robert Copeland says, there is another crisis that wasn't mentioned, and that is China claiming waters in the South China Sea that belong to other nations and doing a naval blockade on at least one of the nations. Yeah, that is interesting. And I think China really needs to back off, okay, on that one. Its claims, okay, involving the seas and oceans, okay, around it are very extensive and not conventional according to international law. So I think that has to be stopped. So Kay was having a problem with sound. I'm glad to see that that has stopped. Robert Copeland says China has several companies that have problems paying their debt, including several companies that are having problems paying their debt, including Evergrande and Country Garden being two of the companies that have major debt, which both, okay, are real estate the companies. That's interesting, but there's a lot of things China can do about that. It doesn't have to be a crisis for China. I hope they're smart enough to know the things they can do. Robert Copeland says, dump the corruption won't take full effect until the 2028 elections due to the U.S. The Senate elections. Well, I think it'll actually take effect in 2025. If we had a dump the corruption movement that was really, really rigorous in relation to voting against the candidates who were taking big money in terms of following the rule that we have, 1/3 of the Senate would be replaced, and it is likely that it would be replaced by third-party people who weren't taking big money in 2024. And the whole House also, it would be very public by that time that there was this Dump the Corruption movement that was enforcing its view that no big money should be in the elections, and that same movement would be in full force likely in the 2026 elections and the 2028 elections. Okay, incidentally, in the 2026 elections, okay, the Dump the Corruption movement would have the effect of replacing another 1/3 of the Senate, so that 2/3 of the Senate uh, would be occupied by people who wouldn't have taken any big money, Robert. But even by 2025, the fear that would sweep both the Senate and the House of this movement would be monumental. If we got rid of all the House incumbents and we got rid of 1/3 of the Senate, okay, incumbents, that would be a very forceful slap upside the head for these office holders. And they wouldn't be likely to take any big money ever again. Now, that depends on how rigorous we are in enforcing the rule. That's why I try to be so rigid, okay, when it comes to the rule. If everybody follows that rule and the office holders see that everybody is following that rule and they are getting swamped when they run, they will conform. I guarantee that. They will conform. They will conform or else. And Madeline says, could there be a crisis here at home? Not just the elections, but people out in the streets because of how bad the economy and the environment will get. Well, maybe, but not by 2024. We're in 2023 now. We have only a little more than a year to go until the elections of 2024. And I don't think the economy and the environment is going to get sufficiently bad that people are likely to reject their incumbents in the wholesale fashion that we need them to do. That's the important thing, I think, about the Dump the Corruption movement. If people follow the rule, it will be a wholesale disaster for the incumbents. And that's what we, the voters, need to present them with. We need to present them with a very, very loud message when it comes to big money, change or else. Kay says, I think so. Peace and Peace Voter, who's Madeline, says, thank you, Kay. Robert Copeland says, a lot of politicians are taking big money from AIPAC, so I don't see any change after the 2024 election. Well, Robert, if they're all beaten because they're taking big money from AIPAC, there sure is going to be big changes after the 2024 elections. In other words, if everybody votes against the politicians taking big money from AIPAC, if everybody takes the big money as the reason to vote against those candidates, there's going to be change. There's going to be change. So Madeline says, about time. This was in relation, to Ursula von der Leyen. And Madeline said, I hadn't heard that. D. And Peace Voter says, won't they find someone else similar to replace her? Not if the parliament were to vote her out, and it were clear why the parliament, okay, was voting her out. Uh, Juju says, okay, to invite me. Okay, Juju is actually Jawad, who's been working with us on uh, the live stream. Uh, Jawad, for tonight, it's 10:02, and I will soon be signing off. I want to keep this show to pretty much, okay, an hour. But let me explain to you. Uh, you were part of Around the World with D Stream, correct? Badi, okay,
Yes, he is.
he's a part. Okay, so the StreamYard link to this stream. Okay, in other words, everybody who's part of that group is invited to all, okay, of our streams. Okay, so basically, by being part of that group, you are invited, okay, to this stream. Now, as it is now, I intend to end this stream, okay, in just a few minutes. But tomorrow there will be, okay, another stream. That will be, okay, a Dump the Corruption screen. And I will be leaving the StreamYard link to that stream there, okay, as well. And if you would like, you're perfectly welcome to join me for that stream and for other future streams, okay, as well. Okay, so you're quite welcome, but I think for this stream, it's a little too late. I don't want to introduce uh, an entirely new discussion because, frankly, I'm tired. So,
Right. I was going to say it's late. The show's over, and
okay, so
yeah,
there
Joanne,
it is.
just remember to go into the messenger around the world
All right.
messenger chat.
Okay, with D and friends, I always leave the StreamYard link there. Okay, and anyone who's a member of that group has a standing invitation to join me. Okay, Robert Copeland says, Joe, if only Dump the Corruption is strong enough, and I don't see that happening anytime soon, as most people never heard. I agree with you, Robert. I mean, I agree with you. Only if Dump the Corruption is strong enough. That's why I keep on streaming about Dump the Corruption. So please help me out, okay, as best you can, because if we don't do this by 2024, and either Biden or Trump becomes the president of the United States again, we're done for. I know everybody's involved in other things, like in Medicare for All and pressuring for Medicare for All, okay, and pressuring for the climate emergency, okay, and pressuring um, 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 for Social Security expansion or student debt elimination, okay, or a variety of issues that are important to them. But to my mind, I am dealing with the most important issue here. Dumping the corruption is the most important issue. If we don't get that going for 2024 and either Biden or Trump becomes the president, we are all done for, guys. Hi, Brandy. Brandy says, sorry, I missed the show, D.
I know Brandy's has a lot on her plate with work and plus her health. It's just a lot.
Yeah, I know it's just a lot. And I really appreciate it when Brandy comes by. Okay, so anyway, so that's what I'm saying. That's really right now, that's the central issue. It's a necessary condition to be successful on all the other issues we want to be successful about, including foreign policy. Robert says, rent control and tenant rights are two of my main issues I am fighting for, and they're extremely important. I grew up in a rent controlled apartment in New York City, and we had tenants' rights at that time, and I am overwhelmingly sympathetic to that particular fight. But I have to tell you, Robert, the most important issue is getting Trump and Biden beat, getting all of the bribe people out of Congress, and 1/3 of the people taking big money out of the Senate. That is the most important issue right now and right on up to the election. And everybody has got to be involved with that issue. And everybody has got to commit to voting against the candidates who have undermined and are undermining our democracy right now. We have no democracy because of these people who are taking the big money. And I know most of them think that they're not really big offenders because all they're doing is taking a lot of money from people who will contribute more than $200 to them in campaigns. But from my point of view, that is big money because that group of people, are people who, by and large, are still supporting the status quo. And if you're taking big money from that group of people, you're still going to be pretty much for the status quo or for changes on the margins. People can't be allowed to take anything but small donations less than $200. And we can't pass a rule to that effect until we get rid of all the Congress people who are taking more than $200 donations, and all the senators taking more than $200 donations, and all the presidential candidates taking more than $200 donations. I mean, we've got to be sensible about this. Brandy says, Richie Torres is getting some big heat for the money he is getting from Israeli PACs. And he should be getting that big heat. Not only that, everybody should be voting against him in the 2024 election. Everybody should be singing Goodbye, Richie. So, I guess that's me for tonight. Okay, thank you, Dee, for joining this evening.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Brandy says he is blocking people on social media for pointing it out. Fine, he can block as many people as he wants. I hope he blocks every one of the people who ask for his head based on the fact that he is taking big money. Because I'll tell you something, that guy has been taking big money from the get-go. And he needs to be thrown out. And Brandy says, First Amendment violation. And Madeline says, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Madeline, for coming by. I always like it when you're here.
Same. It's good when the gang's here, right?
It is good when the gang's here. So thank you, everybody, and good night. I'll be back tomorrow with the Dump the Corruption show.
Yes, and we'll be back at 8 p.m. Also, Joe will be joining me tomorrow.
Yes, I will. I will be joining.
And so we'll see everybody tomorrow.
Oh,
Thank you for being.
Okay. Also on Friday, I expect to be joined by Christina Khalid.
Okay.
Okay, as well, Friday at 9 on my Dump the Corruption show. I'm going to be interviewing her. I think she is currently running, okay, as the Green Party Senate candidate, okay, in Jersey, though I'm not sure she's going to continue with that. I've heard that she might decide to run for the congressional seat that's being vacated, okay, by Andy Kim, so he can run for the Senate seat. Okay. Okay. I'm of two minds concerning that. The first mind is that she probably will have a better chance uh, uh, to be elected, okay, to the Congress. But I also know that we need someone in the worst way, not only to run against, specifically Menendez, but to run against Andy Kim too, because even though Andy Kim says that he doesn't take any corporate PAC money, I know that he does take some amount, okay, of big money. He doesn't rule that out from individuals. He hasn't ruled out, to my knowledge, direct contributions from the corporations themselves. He's just said he won't take any corporate PAC money. Also, he hasn't said he won't take any big money from party committees. And the party committees are laundering big money from the corporate PACs, so the Democratic candidates don't have to directly take any money from the corporate PACs. But we're wise to that game. So what I'm saying is that Andy Kim is a board candidate. Now he can say from here till tomorrow that he's not a board candidate. But if he's not a board candidate, why isn't he for Medicare for all? What is he doing supporting the bankrupt current Obamacare system we have now? His theory of public finance, okay, is also one that relies on taxation and borrowing. Because he's actively resisted learning about the MMT approach to public finance. Anyway, on solely dump the corruption grounds, he needs to go, whether he's running for the Congress or whether he's running for the Senate. And if Christina Khalid could beat him for the Senate, it would be a very wonderful thing. I know the odds are very small, but if we could get the dump the corruption movement started in New Jersey in a big way, if she should run a dump the corruption campaign, that might start to get some publicity for dump the corruption and might start to fuel the movement. And if the movement got strong in New Jersey, she could beat them both in a run for the Senate. Anyway, okay, I do want to say good night now. So good night again.
Yes, good night, everybody, and good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Yes, good night. My dog just went, she lifted her head up.